Hi everyone, this is Mark Brunet with QBrush.com, and in this chapter we're going to be going over the head shape basics. Painting heads is probably the hardest thing to do for artists, the hardest thing to actually get really good at, because there are a lot of things going on when it comes to painting a face or just drawing a face. As opposed to inanimate objects, for example, like a rock or a tree or whatever landscape, faces actually can convey emotion quite easily. There's a lot that can be shared between two people by just looking at somebody else, and the same goes for painting, even if it's between a viewer and an actual art piece. So what that does to the level of complexity of approaching this task, or like the level of complexity of actually painting a head, is that it can go wrong really quickly. Faces is something that we look at every day. Whenever we meet someone, that's probably the first thing that you look at, unless you're a pervert. But this is something that everybody's used to seeing all the time, as opposed to I guess your feet or your back. Those are things that you don't generally see often. You just they're there. You kind of know what they look like because you've seen a few in your life, but it's not something that you see every day and multiple times a day. Faces is really it's one of those things that even somebody that doesn't know anything about art can really pick on the mistakes, or even if they don't know exactly what's wrong, they'll know that the face is wrong. So it's one of those things that's really challenging, because you really can't afford to make any mistakes when it comes to to painting a head. So what we're going to be doing is painting a female head, which is basically a softer version of the male head. So all the features are just soften up, and the way I approach this is I generally start with a sketch like you see here on the left, and this is what will be my base. So I place it in the angle that I want. I put it, I push it to this level of detail, and then I go over and actually add more details, add the colors, the shading, all this stuff. But behind all of that, which looks fairly simple, there's a lot of things that I sort of have in my mind whenever I approach it. So those things are what I'm going to be talking about now, which is the simple simple volumes that are used to build a head. The way I generally think about it is basically two different shapes. So it's going to be a sphere like you see, and then this sort of block, like long rectangle cube thing that is attached to create the jaw. So those lines that I have on here, it's just a few guides. So the one that's sort of splits the sphere in half horizontally, that is going to be my eyebrows line. So this is going to be where the eyebrows touch at their highest, and this is also going to be where most of the time the top of the ear is going to sort of land, and then at the bottom of the sphere, as you can see from the front view, on the very right here is going to be kind of like the tip of my nose, or the area where the nose is going to be located. So every character is different, obviously, but this is generally a good point to place the nose, and then you take that distance all the way down to the the bottom, the chin, and then split that in half, and that's going to be sort of the line for your mouth. So this is as far as I think about it whenever I do something like that. So all characters are different. There's not like a precise rule for everything. But those are fairly loose guidelines that generally work pretty well, and this is the kind of stuff that pretty much everybody can learn to actually draw, because it's not that complicated, and those shapes are actually fairly easy to imagine in a 3D space. So to put them in perspective is not too hard, because they're very simple volumes. So this is really what you should be practicing if you're if you plan on doing a lot of portraits or doing a lot of heads in different angles. Now, if your style is a little bit more cartoony, or if you want to do like anime or manga style, this would be actually pretty close to what would be a final head shape. So you don't need much more detail, since it's a very stylized, simplified version of the real thing. I'm not talking about the facial features, obviously. You want something more than those little lines, but as for the head shape goes, that would be probably pretty good. But now if you want to push it a little bit more, so to something that's a little bit more realistic, like what we want to be doing for this lesson, we'll need a little bit more information on there to be able to then go and do the values on it. So, you know, paint the shading and the colors and all that stuff. So what we're going to be doing is taking this head here because it's at a good angle to be able to see the different volumes, and we're going to sort of sculpt in those shapes that we have here. So the, you know, the sphere and the kind of like rectangle piece, and obviously as you can see here, you know, you can go ahead and sculpt it a lot more, finesse it a lot more. But what we're going to be doing here, what I'm going to be showing you guys in 2D, you know, with this drawing, is the I guess the simplified version. So if we were to take the next step, you know, having started with what we already had. So basically, we're going to transform a little bit the skull. So initially it was a sphere. Now we're going to transform it a little bit more to kind of like a soft rectangle. So as you can see here, where the forehead sort of ends and then leads onto the top of the head, there's a little bit more of a sharp edge there than like a smooth sort of round surface. So it's a little bit more like boxy than it was before. It's fine to draw a sphere initially because it's really simple and it gives you a good guide and it's quick. But if we want to think about what the shading is going to look like on all of that, we have to think of it that way, more of a boxy shape. So on top of that, now to the, you know, sort of like the face surface, we're going to go ahead and sculpt, you know, like this little dent for the eye socket, and then place on the nose. So the nose is an interesting shape, so you can see it here a little bit more in details because it's a little bit, you know, not as obvious to look at it as a drawing, but here in 3D, as you can see, you know, it's kind of like a rectangle, so it's like a complex cube, I guess, which is still a fairly simple geometrical shape to sort of imagine in a 3D space and be able to draw it, you know, on your own. And then after that, you know, I'm gonna be sort of slicing the jaw from sort of like the cheek point all the way down, and that's going to be pretty much it. So, you know, if you're able to draw this much on your own, if you can remember those lines, those very simple lines, then you'll be pretty good with the shading. Your shading should be pretty accurate. Now, obviously, if you want to look at the 3D model here and those renders, this would be the next step. So let's say, you know, you're able to do this really easily. Now, after that, you can start to sort of study this. I have a cheat sheet for you guys to look at. I've also included with the lesson, with the heads and all the different angles. And you know, you can start to practice those and see how the light reacts on surfaces that are a little bit more complicated. So it's not as geometrical. It's a little bit rounder, smoother. But yeah, I mean, if you're able to do this, you should be in a very good spot. So having all those geometrical shapes here, obviously this helps us a lot understand how the light is going to react to it. So if we had rounded shapes that are a lot more intricate, a lot more detailed, a lot more subtle, it gets a lot harder to be able to understand how the light would react on it. But if we have something like this, you know, everybody knows how to do the shading on a cube. So this is kind of like the idea behind this. We want to simplify it as close as we can to a cube or a sphere, keep it as simple as possible so that it's very easy to imagine how the light would react on it. So in the next chapter, we're going to be looking at pushing the sketch that we did at the very beginning of the tutorial and pushing that to something a little bit more advanced so that we can actually start to put some colors on it. So I'll see you then.